Part 2. Njambi, the littlest daughter. In the village of Kalyande, a peaceful community settled between the floating escarpments of the Great Rift Valley and the shadow of Mount Kalyande, the old man, Murito, was sick. He had tried many herbal remedies and modern medicines. He had bathed in a bath of lavender. He had breathed in the smoke of burning eucalyptus. He had worn sacred beads around his neck. He had poured libations on the ground in offering to his ancestors. He had drunk palm wine mixed with rooibos tea. He had rubbed palm oil on his aching joints. When none of those things worked, he drank cow's milk. And when that did not work, he drank cow's blood. He had also tried ibuprofen, paracetamol, penicillin, amoxicillin, erythromycin, tetracycline, ciprofloxacin, fluoxetine, fluvoxamine, paroxetine, citalopram, and many other medicines that had names that seemed like the whole alphabet jumbled into new permutations and combinations that made no sense. Still, Murito did not improve. When Dr. Chege, Murito's old friend who was a doctor and a shaman, came to visit, he examined Murito. When Dr. Chege finished, he sat in silence, stroking his beard. During that time, Murito's wife, Niobe, and his 4 daughters, Gathoni, the eldest, Wanjiku, the second, Shiro, the third, and Njambi, the littlest daughter, who waited with anxious eyes, knitted brows, and folded hands. Finally, Dr. Chege spoke. Murito, you are very ill. Your cure is beyond my skills as a physician and even as a shaman. But as a shaman, I believe I know what would heal you. A drink from the water of life. The water of life? Murito exclaimed. But that is only a myth. Dr. Chege nodded, his expression solemn. Sometimes, old friend, there is more truth in myth than in fact. That is the prescription I will leave you with this morning. Imagination is more crucial than knowledge, curiosity more important than certainty, and wonder is the beginning of wisdom. Murito nodded, but looked as troubled and perplexed as Njambi, the littlest daughter, felt listening. By the look on Njambi's mother and sister's faces, she could tell they felt the same way. Shamans often spoke in riddles, and the riddles Dr. Chege shared that morning seemed less useful than a bottle of pills or a syringe of vaccine. But as custom dictated, everyone remained polite and respectful, Murito most of all, thanking his old friend Dr. Chege and wishing him a safe journey home. But immediately upon the doctor's departure, Njambi's mother and sisters fell down at Murito's feet weeping, certain that they would soon be losing him. Each of Njambi's sisters wailed louder than the next, each insisting that she would be the most heartbroken over the loss of their father. It was not unusual for them to compete in this manner, and Njambi, being the youngest and smallest, often could not even make her voice heard in these debates, much less squeeze between her sisters as they formed a tight ring around their father, taking turns between their tears, suggesting what items their father might leave them in his will. Sad, Njambi shuffled outside, where she noticed Dr. Chege's figure receding down the road. She decided to chase after him, running the length of the village, finally catching his attention by tugging on his sleeve. Dr. Chege, isn't there some medicine you can give my father? An oil or balm, or even a charm or spell that you can use? Dr. Chege smiled down at her, his eyes twinkling. Oh, Njambi, you are a good and loving daughter. I can see how worried you are, but everyone must face their frailty, even the inevitability of their mortality. Njambi thought for a moment, and realized that Dr. Chege must have to confront and tell people the bad news that they were ill or even dying every day. She wondered aloud, Dr. Chege, what is it like for people to know that they are dying? Dr. Chege laughed, but his voice was gentle. What is it like to pretend you are not? At this, Njambi's heart felt a little colder. She did her best to put on a brave face, but a lump was forming in her throat. Dr. Chege, seeing her frown, spoke up. But there is hope for your father. The water of life. But it's just a story, Njambi said, biting her tongue because she knew it was rude to interrupt adults. Ah, yes, but some stories have kernels of truth. More riddles. Njambi found herself digging her nails into her palm, her frustration a flare rising inside her to rival her sadness. She bit her tongue again, afraid she might cry or afraid she might say something else rude to Dr. Chege. Again, as if he were reading her innermost thoughts, he patted her on the shoulder. "Dear Njambi, don't take life so seriously. It's not permanent." Then he turned and made his way down the road. When Njambi returned to her home, her mother was weeping silent tears while her sisters were still pushing and shoving to be the closest to her father's feet, each with a list of things they wanted to inherit. "Oh my," Marito cried. "Will I ever be well again?" "Perhaps one of our daughters might go to seek the water of life," Njambi's mother, Niobe, suggested. "Yes, father, one of us can go seek it," Gathoni, the eldest daughter, said. She always thought herself the best daughter and was always looking for ways to prove herself over her sisters and gain their father's favor. "According to legend," Marito said, "the spring that feeds the pool where the water of life can be found is high atop Kalyande Mountain." "But Kalyande is so far through the forest, across the river, and through the desert," Mwanjiku, the second oldest, said. "And the mountain is very high," Shiro, the third daughter, added. "It will be a long and dangerous journey, yes," Maritu said, his voice sad, for he did not want to ask his daughters to take on such a perilous quest for him. "I will do it," Gathoni said, standing up and marching to the doorway. "And then you will know that I am your favorite and best daughter, and you can give to me our family cows so I can start a dairy business." Although Njambi could see her sisters shoot resentful gazes Gathoni's way, no one said anything to object. It was not a time for arguing with their father so ill. Gathoni had always been the most responsible sister, so perhaps it was best that she go search for the water of life. "Very well," Marito said. "Go with my blessing." Gathoni turned, put on her sandals and head wrap, and started off for Mount Kalyande. Gathoni set off down the road and, not long after, reached the acacia forest. Many people of their community were afraid of the forest, for it was said trickster spirits lived there, as well as dangerous animals. But as Gathoni came under the yellow lattice of the acacia branches, with their emerald leaves and white thorns, she found the forest quite beautiful. She pulled out her phone and began to take pictures of herself with the flora and fauna in the background so that she could post and boast in her social media profiles. As she was taking a picture of herself, she nearly tripped over a young boy along the side of the road. The boy was dressed in ragged clothes and had no shoes on. She knew there were poor people who were not civilized that lived around the forest. She imagined this boy was one of those backwards people. He was holding his foot, which was red and swollen. "Help me, please," he said. "A bee has stung my heel. I need some balm to soothe it so I may walk again." "I am very sorry," Gathoni said, "but I am already helping my father and I do not have time to help you. Maybe you should think of wearing some shoes so you do not get stung next time." Gathoni left the boy and continued into the forest, scrolling through her phone to pick the best filter for her latest photo. So engrossed was she in her decision on Valencia filter and bubbling with the excitement of how many likes she would get from her friends, she didn't notice how the forest became thicker, the trees denser and their leaves blacker and more leathery, their thorns growing longer and dagger-like. It was only when the forest was so thick that it blotted out the daylight and Gathoni had to adjust the light on her screen that she realized she might have lost her way. "Oh my, I think I might have wandered off the trail." Gathoni checked the GPS on her phone but saw with a flutter of panic in her chest that she no longer had reception. She began to look around and call out for help. No one answered, and yet she felt as if she were being watched. She tried to retrace her steps along the forest paths, but she had not been paying attention to the twists, turns, and the landmarks that distinguished them. Her phone had just seemed much more interesting at the time. As Gathoni became more lost and more terrified, she thought she heard a rustling in the bushes. The leaves and branches suddenly exploded, and a leopard leapt out at her, swinging its claws and grinning a terrible, hungry smile full of sharp teeth. "Ay!" Gathoni screamed. All sorts of birds were scared out of the trees and took to the sky. Wagtails stopped their wagging. Panicked hornbills made a noise like horns blowing. Tinkerbirds stopped their tinkering, and go-away birds, well, quickly went away. Gathoni ran screeching and tearing through the underbrush. The thorns scratched her, tore her dress, and snagged her hair. Somehow, with enough running, she stumbled her way out of the woods. When she recognized where she was, she started back to the village. But when she neared her family's home, she realized that she had failed to find the water of life. Instead, she filled the bottle she had brought with her from the stream beside the village and brought it home. Everyone was shocked to see Gathoni so disheveled, scratched, and bloody when she arrived home. She refused to talk about her journey and simply handed the bottle of water to their father. Marito thanked her, pulled out the cork, then drank the water. But he felt no better. "Maybe it was from the wrong spring," Marito said, disappointed. "No matter," Gathoni said. "I tried." Then she left with her family's cows to start up her dairy business. After Gathoni had departed, Niobe turned to Wanjiku. "Wanjiku, you are the smartest of all our daughters. Surely you can find the spring that holds the water of life, even if Gathoni could not." "I will try," Wanjiku said. "But now that Gathoni has taken all our cows, how will I know that father loves me?" "Your father and I love you very much. But if you need proof, perhaps we can give you my loom, which I use to make scarves, skirts, and robes." "That would be perfect," Wanjiku said, jumping up, for she loved to weave, and the loom was on the top of her list of items she wanted to inherit. She danced around the house, retrieving her sandals, delighted at the thought of the money she would make, weaving her own fabrics and selling them online. Wanjiku followed a route that led her to the Kaliande River first. She stood awestruck for a few moments, taking in its shimmering waters and serpentine banks that unfolded like a silk scarf cast across the shoulders of the world. As Wanjiku walked, looking for a place shallow enough to ford, she daydreamed of the beautiful skirts, scarves, and wraps she planned to make on the loom, and the e-commerce empire she would run. Lost in her thoughts, she was startled to hear a woman call for help. The woman was standing along the riverbank in water that reached just under her knees. She had a graceful figure, bent at the waist, and a strong back without any sway in it. Her arms were thrust into the water as if she were searching for something. Closer up, Wanjiku could see that the woman's face was creased with deep lines of worry. When she spoke, her voice was fraught with despair. "I have dropped my water pot into the river," the woman said. "We do not have access to safe water in our home, so without this pot I cannot quench the thirst of my children, cook for them, or help them wash their hands. Kind young lady, can you please help me find it?" "I'm sorry you dropped your water pot," Wanjiku said, "but I am already helping my father, and I must be hurrying on so I can get home and receive my very own loom. I'm starting an e-commerce business, you know. Maybe you will learn to be more careful next time." Wanjiku, realizing that this would be a good place to cross, left the woman behind and began to wade across the river. As Wanjiku walked, the water rose around her. It began at her ankles and moved up past her shins, her knees, and then to her waist. She had to take careful steps to keep moving across without being pushed downstream. The current grew stronger. It soon became difficult for Wanjiku to keep her footing. Now the water was up to her chest and just under her armpits. She was not a good swimmer, and she prayed the water would rise no higher. To her horror, as she took another step, she felt something long and slithery wrap itself around her legs. "Eek!" she screamed. "A snake has gotten me!" She thrashed about in the water, punching and clawing at the snake, which she was sure was a river python and would pull her under to drown her, then swallow her whole. She screamed for help, looking for the woman she had left at the riverbank to ask her for help, but she was nowhere to be seen. Each time Wanjiku tried to move to the safety of the opposite bank, the python squeezed tighter, but when she moved backwards to the bank she had started from, the python's coils became looser. Wanjiku cried and wiggled and kicked, moving in the direction of the shore. Finally, the terrible snake let her go, but after another step, she plunged into deeper water that swept her away. She bobbed and screamed again, splashing and treading water until she finally felt the riverbed under her feet. She scrambled for land, crawled up the bank, and collapsed flat on her face. "Enough of this," she said, checking to make sure the python did not follow her and wringing out her clothes. "It's no use trying to cross this river." When she was a bit drier, she scooped some of the river water into the same bottle Gathoni had carried and went home to her parents. "This water is certainly fresh. It tastes of sunlight, soft rain, and melted snow, but I feel no better," Maritu said after drinking. "I am very sorry, Father," Wanjiku said, already gathering the pieces of the loom and packing them into her bags. "I suppose I chose the wrong stream as well." Then, with her bags slung across her shoulders, Wanjiku left to start her own business like her sister before her. Maritu and Niobe turned to Shiro. "Shiro, you are the most beautiful of my daughters, and I am sure you will go out to win many hearts," said Niobe. "But first, for your father's sake, will you go and search for the water of life?" "Of course," Shiro said, "but only if you promise me all of our furniture and your mobile phone. I will need these things as I set up my own recording studio and become a famous singer." "I promise you all those things, if you can help to save your father," Niobe said, even though Marito looked sad at the thought of having nothing left of his own. "Very well," Shiro said. Shiro took a circuitous route to Mount Kaliande, her path leading her first to the desert. On the edge of the desert, she met an old man. He was tall with a smooth, hairless head, and lines in his face and scars on his hands that spoke of wisdom and experience. "Help me, young one," he said. "I have just crossed the desert, and I am so thirsty." "I have water in my calabash here," Shiro said, "but I need it since I am crossing the desert myself." And so she left the old man. But once Shiro entered the desert, a great wind descended from the sky and struck her like a slap to her face. It did not relent. She had to lean just to keep walking upright. Her skirts whipped around her and her head wrap flew away. Dust filled the air and made it impossible to see. Sand stung her skin like needles. It burned in her nose and scratched at her throat. It made her eyes water and left a bitter taste in her mouth, as if she were being buried alive. "This is unbearable!" Shiro cried and turned back. When she reached her village, she poured the water from her calabash into the bottle meant for the water of life and offered it to her father. Her father drank. "Thank you. This water tastes bitter, like strong medicine, but I feel no better," he said with a sigh. "I suppose I picked the wrong spring, too. What a shame," Shiro said, dragging the family table out the door, followed by each of the chairs. As she took the last one, she put her new phone to her ear and began to speak to her agent. Marito leaned back into his bed, waiting to die. Niobe sat down beside him, took his hands, and wept. Njambi, the littlest daughter, would normally be helping to prepare supper, but the table on which to eat was gone, and so were the chairs for sitting. There were no cows to tend to, and no loom for her to help her mother make fabrics. She went to her mother and father and said, "Mother, father, I will go and find the spring with the water of life." "But, Njambi, you are our littlest daughter. You are too small and too young for such a task," Niobe said. "But there is no one else, and I must try for father's sake," Njambi said. So Njambi left and started down the road towards the distant peak of Mount Kaliande, its craggy head surrounded by frosty clouds. Soon enough, the mountain peak was hidden from view as Njambi walked under the boughs of the acacia forest. She enjoyed the forest, for she liked to watch the flycatchers, the kestrels, and the sunbirds. Since there was not a mobile phone left among her and her parents, she walked along, taking in the sights, letting them imprint on her mind instead of a memory card. She valued the views and sights all the more, for she realized she would never experience them quite the same way again. As Njambi walked, she heard a voice. "Please, help me." She turned and saw a boy sitting on the ground. He was in simple clothes that looked threadbare. Njambi was moved, for she imagined he must have been very poor. He was holding his foot and looked to be in anguish. "What's wrong?" Njambi asked. "I have been stung by a bee. My foot is too swollen for me to walk, and no one will help me." The boy began to weep. "I fear I might die here." "Don't be afraid," Njambi said, kneeling down beside him. She examined his foot and saw that the bee's stinger was still lodged there. She drew it out with a gentle touch like her mother would use. "See, this is all that was the matter. You will feel better soon." "Thank you," said the boy. "I can see the swelling is already going down. I hope you have a safe journey." Njambi continued through the forest. The branches overhead grew thick and the light weak. Soon it was as dark as night. Njambi tried to remain brave, but she felt scared in the dark as the sounds of the strange animals and insects rose up in a nocturnal chorus. Her heart beat loudly in her chest. When she heard a rustling in the bushes, she was sure she would faint with fright. The branches parted with a snapping noise. Njambi was prepared to run away when she realized that the noise had been made by a starling. It was one of the most beautiful starlings Njambi had ever seen. Its feathers gleamed like jewels, and its song was sweet like a flute. It fluttered slowly down the path and bounced there on its short little legs. "I think it wants me to follow it," Njambi said. She decided it couldn't hurt, so she did. The starling led Njambi to the edge of the river. It was late now and too dark to cross, so Njambi wrapped herself in her kakoi and slept. In the morning, Njambi opened her eyes to a clear sky. She could see Mount Kaliande in a brand new palette of colors, snow of rose, stone of blue, and a skirt of emerald forest. The orange ball of the sun perched on the mountain's shoulder. Njambi took in the view until her stomach began to grumble. She picked some mangoes and ate them for breakfast, as a flock of sacred ibis alighted at the river's edge, and a lavender crane came stalking through the water looking for fish. While she sat on the riverbank, a tall woman came striding through the shadows, her face inclined downward as she searched the water at her feet. Oh dear, she said, her hands pressed to her temples. "What's the matter?" Njambi asked the woman. "I've dropped my water pot into the river, and without it I cannot carry water back to my family." "Oh, that is terrible," Njambi said. She jumped down from the riverbank and began to help the woman. She was surprised when her hands touched something under the water that was not a rock, a log, or a tortoise. She lifted it up. "My water pot!" the woman exclaimed. "You have found it! Many blessings upon you." Njambi said goodbye and began to cross the river, as this place looked to be as good as any to try to ford. The water grew deeper as she walked, surrounding her ankles, her knees, and her waist. The current grew stronger. It was hard for Njambi, the smallest of all her sisters, to fight the pull of the river. She felt her feet slipping in the mud. Just as the current was about to sweep her away, something long and slithery wrapped itself around her waist. "Oh no! It is the python that tried to eat Wanjiku!" she screamed, feeling the thick body coil around her. "I will be swallowed whole!" The snake thing wrapped itself around her more tightly. Njambi was too small to fight. She felt herself ready to cry, not out of fear, but from the thought that she would never see her family again, and that she had let her parents down. But just when she had lost all hope, she rose up and out of the water. She was lifted and hung suspended in the air, the water glittering as it passed beneath her. A fish jumped on the surface, dazzling her eyes. Njambi was not drowning. She was being carried across the water. It was not a snake that had snared her, but a mother elephant that had gone for a swim with her baby. The mother elephant set Njambi down gently on the opposite bank, while the baby let out a playful spray of water from its trunk. "Thank you very much," Njambi said. The elephant waved her trunk and lumbered back into the river to watch over her baby. Njambi looked across the river to see if the woman with the pot had witnessed the strange event, but she was gone. The desert loomed ahead for Njambi, a flat, boiling sandscape with rippling dunes, shimmering light, and the dried, bleached bones of animals. These were animals who had become lost and died between the hammer of the sun and the anvil of the hardpan. Njambi was glad to have her calabash as well as her kikoi, which she placed over her head to shield herself from the sun. After a few miles, she came across an old man seated at the base of a dune. His gnarled hands were wrapped around a walking stick. "Hello, sir," she said respectfully, remembering how to address her elders. "Young lady," the old man said in a raspy voice, "my throat is very dry. Can you spare me some water?" "I have some water in my gourd. I can share a little with you, but the rest I need, for I must cross the desert myself." "You are a kind young lady," the man said, taking a small sip from her calabash. "Thank you very much for your generosity." She looked around and saw no one and no thing for as far as the eye could see. Njambi said, "Sir, what are you doing out here in the desert all alone? Aren't you afraid of being lost?" The man smiled. He had dark eyes under droopy lids, but they had a twinkle to them that Njambi liked. "Sometimes lost is exactly where a person needs to be," he said. "That doesn't make sense to me," Njambi said. She was young and little, but thought of herself as very practical. "It doesn't? Then what makes sense to you, young lady?" "Well, no one should get lost. You should always know where you are going, how many kilometers you have come, and how many you have to go." "And how do you know how many kilometers?" "You count them, of course." "But not everything that counts can be counted." Njambi didn't say anything next. She realized that the man, like Dr. Chege, spoke in riddles, and she wondered if he too was a shaman, perhaps on a spirit journey of some sort. As the silence drew out, he said, "The words silent and listen are spelled with the same letters, at least in English. Isn't that interesting?" "Yes, sir, very interesting. But, sir, do you like being lost?" "Aha! Yes, I do. For only when lost can you truly find yourself. One must be defeated in order to be rescued." "But that is the opposite of what—" "Truth is a paradox, young lady. To keep a thing, we must give it away. To hold a thing, one must keep an open hand. To get help, one must give it." "You speak in riddles, sir. Are you a shaman?" The old man shook his head, flexing and adjusting his fingers on his staff. "I'm just a wanderer, turning things inside out and upside down as I walk about and reflect." "That is interesting," Njambi said, because she was not sure what to say next. Old men and their riddles had not been particularly helpful to her as of late, nor had they brought much good news. She looked across the wastes and through the shimmering air at Mount Caliente, but it appeared the old man was not done speaking. "Dear girl, even a potter must create emptiness, a hollow in a pot, in order for there to ever be fullness." Another paradox, but Njambi was beginning to see some sense in his words. "I guess you are right. I had never looked at it that way." "Excellent," the old man said, rising and stretching his legs. Njambi realized he was very tall, like a Dinka or a Maasai. "Well, don't let me delay you any longer. Safe journeys, little one. Thank you for sharing your water." "Yes, thank you, sir. I wish you a safe journey, too." The man climbed the nearest dune and was gone. Njambi continued. As she crossed the dunes and wandered along the wadis, she came across more skeletons of animals that had become lost and died. "I hope I do not end up like them," she said. But as the sun grew higher, it burned her skin and made her eyes water. The sand scorched her feet, making walking painful. She drank some water from her calabash, but it soon was empty. After many kilometers, her mouth grew quite dry. Her tongue felt like it was made of cotton, and her eyelids stuck together when she blinked. It was as if her eyes and her mouth were covered in glue. Just when she thought she could continue no further, clouds rolled into the sky and blocked the sun. A soft rain fell. It soothed Njambi's skin, refilled her calabash, and also cooled the sand, making it more pleasant to walk upon. A refreshing breeze followed, carrying the scents of desert flowers. She was struck with the stark beauty that surrounded her. "The desert can actually be quite beautiful and serene," Njambi said to herself. The desert ended at the foot of Mount Kaliande. Once, long ago, it had been a fiery volcano, but now it slept with a snow-covered brow. It was huge, its sides rising to their own horizons. Its immensity reminded Njambi of a small planet come to rest on this seam of the earth that was the Rift Valley. Somewhere on Mount Kaliande's slopes, hidden within its fissures, was the spring that held the water of life. But Njambi did not know where to begin searching for it. The mountain was so large, and she was just the littlest daughter. "Oh, how will I ever find the spring?" she cried, beginning to despair. "I know where to find the spring you speak of," an old woman said. She was dressed in a burgundy wrap with the plaid designs popular among the Maasai tribe. She sat hunched over beneath a jacaranda tree, its blossoms floating down around her like a lavender snow. Njambi had not noticed her at first and was startled by her appearance, but Njambi quickly composed herself. The old woman continued, "I would like to go to the spring myself, but I cannot climb the mountain without help." "Madam," Njambi said, remembering the way to address an old woman, "I will help you climb if you show me the way." "Very well. Let us climb together," the woman said. Njambi and the old woman started off side by side, Njambi holding the woman's hand and letting her lean upon her shoulder when she needed support. At first, the mountain slopes were lush and covered with acacia trees, elephant trunk flowers, and hedges of clematis. After a while, the woody trees were replaced by bamboo reeds. Buffalo grazed around them, slowly munching grass while hyraxes scurried away for cover. Bush babies watched them from the shadows under the bamboo canopies, their eerie, glowing eyes tracking their every move. "The mountain slopes contain their own climates, each like their own world as the ground grows higher and the air colder," the old woman said. Njambi saw what she meant. After a day of climbing up through forests of whispering trees, they passed into cloudy moorlands. Here the ground was covered in coarse heather. Strange, alien-like trees Njambi had never seen before rose up out of the gloom. The woman called them giant lobelias. They resembled green clubs. Then there were the even stranger groundsel trees, topped with antennae of daisy-like flowers and rings of palm fronds, their sides protected by an armor of dead scales. Njambi and the woman spent the night in the shelter of some rocks and ate a few bananas the woman had carried with her from lower elevations. The next day, as they climbed higher, the land turned to tundra, the heather growing thin. It was replaced by lichen and moss with the occasional aster, their stems lined with long silver hairs for capturing warmth and water. The wind blew moss balls about the travelers' feet like miniature tumbleweeds. The air grew as cold as winter, colder than Njambi had ever experienced, much less imagined. As they climbed higher, something strange seemed to be happening to the woman. Each time Njambi looked at her, she seemed younger. "I thought she had more wrinkles on her face," Njambi thought. Later, she was sure the woman's back had become straighter than it had been at the bottom of the mountain. "The thin air must be getting to me," Njambi said to herself. They continued to climb for another day. The grass disappeared altogether, and they wandered through a wasteland of jagged rocks with shattered faces and razor edges. The wind grew fierce, a cold knife against Njambi's skin, howling down from the snowy cap of the mountain. The wind spoke with a voice of loneliness. Pinnacles of hardened lava rose around them. Here the landscape spoke of ancient eruptions, heaving earth, and the gradual wearing down of rock by rain and wind, snow and ice. Gone were the birds of tropical and temperate climes. The ibises, the bulbuls, and the boo-boos were nowhere to be seen or heard. Here only the harsh cries of gold and black lammergeiers cascaded down the rocky sides. They were giant birds, with wide wingspans adapted to the thin air and well-insulated plumage that looked more like fur than feathers. Njambi felt the change in the air. She had to take 3, even 4 breaths where before she had only taken 1. The cold, dry air made her lungs ache, and her skin was lined with white cracks. Her heart was working extra hard in her chest. She grew tired and stumbled in the loose shale, cutting herself on the sharp volcanic stones. Each step became a greater effort for her. Now Njambi felt like she was leaning on the old woman. As Njambi grew weaker, a second strange thing happened. The woman stepped ahead of her and began to lead her by the hand. But she was clearly no longer an old woman. She was young, tall, and strong. She strode with long legs and took confident steps. The cold did not affect her. "I think I'm imagining things that are not real," Njambi muttered. "This must be altitude sickness. I should turn back." But she could not bear the thought of failing her family, so she trudged upward, holding the woman's hand. They reached a point so high that Njambi felt she could almost touch the stars peeking out overhead. Snow was piled in banks on either side of their path and crunched underneath their feet. Njambi's breath wreathed about her head. She shivered and shook. The woman, definitely leading and definitely appearing younger, like a fit Olympic athlete, led them down into a fissure and into an ice cave. Its sides were shades of amethyst and beryl, shot through with white veins of crystal snow. The air, by contrast, was warm and humid, the sides dripping with water droplets that fell, chiming into a pool. The water in the pool was so warm that steam rose from its surface and made the air thick and cloudy. The change was too much for Njambi. She loosened her wrap to cool herself, for she was suddenly sweating as if in a sauna, and sat lest she faint. Through the mist, Njambi could just make out a few stone walls. They were painted with pictures of dancing figures, with the long, stylized masks characteristic of pictures she had seen of West African masquerade ceremonies. Something about them was full of beauty and foreboding all at once, the way Njambi imagined people were supposed to feel when before a supernatural being. One figure was more compelling than the others. His long black and red face could have been laughing, or it could have been screeching, the mouth opening with long white fangs ready to devour her soul. And even though she was no longer cold, Njambi shivered looking into his burning blue irises, the bottomless pupils eclipsing them like black moons. The shifting of mist made the demon's fangs move, as if they were closing in on her. For a moment, she was certain the figure would step out of the rock, cross the pool, and swallow her. The woman stopped and turned in place, drawing Njambi's attention back to her. The former crone now stood tall and grand next to the pool. There was no doubt that she had transformed into a younger woman. She opened her arms and spoke in a melodious voice. "Behold, the water of life." "Who are you?" Njambi asked. "How can this be?" The woman smiled brightly. "I am Aoife, the spirit of life. This is my pool and my mountain." Njambi quickly shifted to get down on her knees, realizing she was in front of a goddess. Aoife spoke again, but this time her voice was kind and generous. "Sweet Njambi, rise. Do not cast your face to the ground. Yes, be humble, for you are made of earth, but also be noble, for you are made of stars." Njambi looked up from under the kakoi she had used to cover her face. Her hands were shaking. "I still don't understand." "It is my duty to guard the water of life. Only those who pass 3 tests of the heart can be led to it." "What are the tests I must pass?" Njambi asked weakly. "I am very tired. Will I be allowed to rest first?" Aoife laughed. "You have already passed them, my child." Njambi looked to the side and, to her surprise, saw the boy from the forest, the woman from the river, and the old man from the desert standing on the other side of the pool. "Now I know the thin air is making me see things," Njambi said. "Your eyes do not deceive," Aoife said. "This is Msitu," she said, pointing to the boy, "spirit of the forest. When you helped him, you gained passage through the forest." Then she turned to the woman. "This is Mtu, spirit of the river. When you found her pot, she made sure you crossed the river safely." Aoife turned to the old man. "And this old man is Jangwa, the wise spirit of the desert. In exchange for a sip of your water, He granted you comfortable passage across the scorching wastes." Njambi felt overwhelmed. She bowed her head, placed her hands on her heart, and thanked the spirits many times. "Now fill your bottle with the water from the spring," Aoife said. "You will have to hurry back home, for your father has little time left." "But it is such a long way," Njambi said. "It will take me days to return." "Don't worry, Njambi," Mto said. "We are here to help you." "As you helped us," Jangwa said, filling up Njambi's bottle for her. Msitu danced over the rocks and ice, his bare feet unaffected by the sharp edges and cold, slick surfaces. He paused before the mouth of the ice cave, where he whistled. A sharp cry answered, and one of the huge gold and black lammergeiers swooped into their midst and perched next to Njambi, its wings stirring up the clouds of steam. Up close, she could see it was a bizarre-looking bird, as if the parts of a hawk and a condor had been put together under a coat of gold and black fur. "This is a Kinyi. He will help you reach home in time," Msitu said. "But how?" "Like this," Aoife said. She waved her hand and snapped her fingers with a loud crack. A Kinyi let out a cry, flapping up a small windstorm with his wings before taking Njambi up in his talons and soaring out into the starry night. Njambi let out a yelp of fright and grabbed a tight hold of a Kinyi's legs. The ground fell away with the slope of the mountain. Njambi's head spun with vertigo. Then her stomach felt as if it flipped inside her as the Kinyi dove downward. Moving at such speed, Njambi felt the temperature grow warmer in passing bands of thickening air. What had taken days to climb now only took moments to descend, as if a Kinyi could bend time and space with the beat of his wings. Soon they were soaring over the desert wastes, the sinuous lines of dunes and variegated colors of the crystal sands flowing like the dancing brushstrokes of a painting. Next, they crossed the ribbon that was the river Kaliande, which Njambi now knew was fed by the ice and snow of the mountain, as well as the gentle seasonal rains that swept down its slopes as if on the very wishes of old man Jangwa. The dense forest and its emerald canopy passed in the space beyond Njambi's feet. It was wondrous and strange to see the tops of trees below her toes. A Kinyi leaned his wings into the wind, turning on the tips of his feathers. He homed in on Njambi's village and her family's house, and they plunged like a well-aimed arrow at its target. As they passed over houses with a whoosh, a Kinyi let out a loud cry, and the neighbors pointed and shouted.